So yeah, the two ugly stepsisters. So we were talking about Hobbes's political materialist philosophy, and so remember, materialism in this sense is not like liking your stuff or being greedy and liking money and stuff like that. It's that everything's a material substance in motion, and so Hobbes tries to go from there to build a political philosophy where basically the people form together to give over power to this kind of one all-powerful state government that makes all decisions uniform. And so anyway, and then it has ultimate authority. And so that's the replacement of God. But then I think I was making the point that once you replace God with the state, what people start doing is they start becoming legalists. They try to be saved and perfected by the law. And then that's where the two ugly stepsisters come in. They try to be saved by, the first one is legalism. And then the second one, so let me write legalism here. Legalism, and then Antinomianism, which is lawlessness. It's kind of like, well, how do these two things go together? But what starts happening is when you make man or humanity the ultimate authority, and the highest expression of that is in the state or in the government, and then you try to save man through the use of man's laws, and then it doesn't work, you realize, well, wait a second, we can't bring justice, perfection, and salvation by the law, so we have to continue to try to perfect the system, add more laws, add more rules, add more structures, add more methods, to try to get this perfect result. But once you try to get perfect results with imperfect people, and this is one of the assumptions of Enlightenment philosophy that is, I think, really problematic, is that they believe that human nature was perfectible, so that it just needed the right smart people in charge to kind of put in the right controls, and then you could perfect human nature. And you had a lot of that with like, okay, well, maybe we could perfect human nature through education. Maybe we can do it through social things. Maybe we could do it through government. Maybe we could do it through a mix of different policies and procedures, and you could create the perfect man, basically, the ideal humans, the ideal society. You can control the policies, the human heart. You can control the economy, all these things. So anyway, so they try to be saved through the law. Now, it's not God's law, which you can't be saved through the law anyway. And God's law actually, God requires perfection, and God can do that because he's God. But even God's law condescends to recognize the limits of human imperfection. It doesn't solve every problem that exists. And that, and the Bible teaches a religion of being saved by God's grace in Christ. But when you put man as the ultimate authority, you end up with legalism, where man tries to be saved by man's law and tries to bring perfection and justice. And you see that today, and it's actually kind of sad. You see that today with the social justice movement, with all these things, racial justice, all these things. But they're trying to assume man as the ultimate authority, put in these structures and controls, or change the structures and controls to save man through the law and perfect man or bring about justice, but they can't. And because they get stuck on that perfectionism, once you, I don't know, is anybody in here a perfectionist? I'm not a perfectionist, so
Yes.
Perfectionism can be paralyzing, because if something is never adequate, then it can stop you from accomplishing anything. And so there's this phrase that says, okay, the perfect can be the enemy of the good, meaning, if you keep trying to fix things until it's absolutely perfect, you may never produce anything. And so what ends up happening in human systems is man is trying to craft the system so perfectly that it ends up grinding to a halt and becoming paralyzed, where it can't provide any justice. And so imagine like a court system or something like that. It has to go through such perfect procedures, which it can never achieve legal perfection, which it should have adequate procedures because humans make mistakes and there's corruption. So, and that's why you have to have things like innocent until proven guilty, which is kind of threatened again today in a different way. But anyway, you have to have those things, but there are limits to what the results, perfect results they can produce. So if you demand that perfection, this means that the legal system can't provide any justice. And once it can't provide any justice, that benefits people who are the criminals. It encourages people to be lawless because there's no accountability from a justice system or anything whatsoever. So it's these political philosophies that try to bring about justice through human authority. One, they lack authority because it's humans telling other humans what to do. And number two, they actually bring about injustice. They bring about legalism, and they constrict the people who are not doing injustice, and then they harm the people who would seek justice. So the people are you have legalism, where it's a focus on the law, and you have Antinomianism, which is lawlessness. And that you would think those two are polar opposites, but that's why I call them the ugly stepsisters, is that they show up together. You see this in our country somewhat, as there's more law regulation focus on those things. But you saw this in history a little bit in the Soviet Union. It had so many policies and procedures that got added on that basically there was a story of one guy who was in jail in the Soviet Union who was basically able to just keep writing letters of, okay, here, if every complaint had a certain procedure that it had to go through. And so he just kept writing a letter several times a day, and basically is able to bring this whole system to a halt because they can't deal with all the paperwork that comes from doing all that in the bureaucracy. And so that's what happens that's I think the point that I wanted to finish with as far as Hobbes's materialism, is that the problems that it tries to solve, it actually creates and makes it worse because it doesn't have the basis to solve it. Yeah.
Isn't that the Pharisaical system?
Yeah, the legalism. Yeah. Yeah, and then legalism ends up usually setting aside God's law in favor of man's law as well. So, which is lawlessness. It's taking God's law and replacing it with something inferior.